Was this live? Oh my God. No, I'm just kidding. She's my sister. I'm joking.
It's too late.
Hi, me. Don't, okay.
We're having a little interfamilial.
It's a definitely family. We're a family.
Yes. Yes, if people are new and haven't signed up the sign-up sheet, please sign. Thank you.
Just your name.
And if you don't have the link for the website, ask us. We have some programs so you can connect and check us out. The website is slower than we'd like it to be because we don't have the resources, but we promise you we will update it whenever we are able.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody, you stalwarts hanging in at the end of the day. This is the fourth of 4 sessions of a symposium that has been going on all day, Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis and the Indivisibility of Justice, which was organized by Rabab Abdulhadi and her colleagues from San Francisco State University and also from Birzeit University and South Africa Afro-Middle East Center. I'm not going to really give full introductions. And what? An-Najah. Yeah, right. An-Najah National University in Palestine. I'm Petchesky. I'm from New York, and I won't introduce all the people fully. I'll just introduce them. This is Rayan, El-Amine from American University of Beirut in Lebanon, and then we have Saed, Hijleh from An-Najah National University in Palestine, and we have Jeenah from the Afro-Middle East Center in Johannesburg, and Rabab, of course, Ibrahim Abdulhadi from San Francisco State University, and Ahmad Azem from Birzeit University in Palestine. Well, I think what I'll do, I'll say, okay. What? No, I like it. So I'll sit here for a second. I guess what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to model something. For me, this day has been extraordinary. Every single I'm just talking my personal feelings here. Every single presentation has been powerful, thoughtful, evocative, and I think we have a project that needs to, it's preceded us, and it will go on. I'm just going to mention a few of the points that for me were just galvanizing, and that stay with me, and invite my colleagues on the panel to do the same. You don't need to address what I say. This is just my own personal experience. I want to understand, these are questions in my mind. Why is Palestine such a target for right-wing attacks right now, and particularly on campuses? What's the difference about this moment? Is this moment different from the past? Is it continuous with the past? How is it different? How is it similar? And Amani said this question. I thought it relates to this. This is particularly relevant to the United States. Why is the Black Lives Matter movement less controversial than the Palestinian movement? What is it about the Palestinian movement that is so electrifying now and so dangerous and so actually in the vanguard? Also, I think something that came up often, and it's in my mind, what are the strengths and limitations of comparative analysis when we're talking about colonialisms, different colonialisms? Can we extract the particularities and also see the convergences? Another question. This was for me personally an important one. How can we challenge binary ways of thinking about justice in Palestine and Palestinian justice, yet recognize very different positionings of different groups within the hierarchies? Recognize that there is a hierarchy, there's a continuum, there are different positions, and get away from those binary thinking, but there are great, great differences across the hierarchy. And then we talked a lot, there were many mentionings of decolonizing the curriculum, the universities, decolonizing, what do you say this, WOCMES?
WOCMES.
And then, is it decolonizing or is it anti-colonizing? Because decolonizing kind of suggests that we're past, that we can get past, and we know that colonial structures continue. How do we use hybridity to create new structures within those limitations, within the confines of those colonial ones? And then something that came up that really touched me, you know, I think it was An-Najah who talked about decolonizing our bodies and minds. And maybe Saed would add decolonizing our emotions, our feelings. How do we bring love into it? I think that something that we say a lot at home in JDP is that, and we raise it here, passion. Passion and love are integral, critical ingredients of social movements to really make change. So how do we do that? How do we get people to care? To go to Brooke's question, how do you get people to care? And maybe part of that is personal narratives, stories, bringing people into particular personal lives. And then coalition building. This is hard, and we can't move forward anywhere if we don't do it. So caring has to be caring across different social movements. How do we replicate the kind of sustained social justice movements across various struggles that Brooke described in her discussion of what happened at Occidental University? That was amazing. Those things happen, they happen here, they happen there. We can moments of those erotic eruptions, and then they are smashed. And why is that? How can we get past what seems to me, I'm older probably than anyone in this room, I'll just admit it. And to me, it's hard to get away from a sense of cyclical. Of we've been here, we did that, we triumphed and we sank. And we triumphed and we sank. I don't want to, I do believe that despair is counter-revolutionary. And I won't succumb to it. But it's hard sometimes. How do we defeat the false view of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism? What new strategies? We must do that. That is critical, number one, in our strategizing in Palestine, in the US, in Europe, wherever we are. And I'm also concerned about getting past other kinds of constructs, particularly the whole dilemma of free speech. Free speech has been appropriated by the Zionist forces. The First Amendment in the US has been appropriated. We all saw this coming. We knew for years and years and years that that was too limited a framework. And yet, we don't want to give it up. So how do we get past that? And finally, the problem of nationalism. When teaching Palestine, how do we teach beyond the nation state? Anyway, I'll leave it there. Those were some of my thoughts and feelings, and I'd like to open and invite all of you. Let's just start with Rayan. Maybe you had some.
You mind skipping me?
Oh,
I don't have
you
much
have some
to
thought.
say.
Yeah. If you want 2 minutes to think.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, Ahmad.
And I apologize in advance. Maybe I will need to leave.
You don't apologize for that. We thank you for these two great days.
Actually, my impression today, and it is actually related to something that I have been thinking about for a while now, that in the year 2010, 2011, we have almost thinking about that we are living in what we call the network society. That we don't need structural organization. We don't need even sorry. We don't need a leadership. We don't need a leadership. We can manage alone using the new social media, using the new internet and new networks. So we don't need all of this. And this was especially during the Arab Spring. And from what I hear today, I can see that there are networks, there are groups and waves and campaigns of people who are facing an institution. Israel is an institution. They are funding a strategic affair ministry with a lot of money in a very secretive way. We have a giant called Children Adelson pouring hundreds of millions of dollars every day, every year, annually, having this new Israeli-American council that it is more even extreme than IBAC or others. We have, so I think we should start thinking about a new structure. GAP's General Student of the Palestinian Student up to 1993 was the Palestinian national vehicle. It is not enough anyway. If it is, even if it's functional, it is not enough because not only Palestinians work on this. But I think we should start thinking, even if we speak about teaching Palestine, that maybe we need an institution that, and maybe two institutions. One is not network. I think the idea of network should be rethought again. It is very important. It is very good when we have the trigger, when we have an event, so you have a kind of mobilization. But when you don't have such mobilization, we need something to sustain. So I think starting with a network, but moving them to institution. I think maybe we need a world organization for justice, not for Palestine. And Palestine is in the center of this world organization, something like anti-apartheid. It is not for Palestine only, but Palestine is there. It will be there. So I think this is, for Palestinians, I think we need a kind of confederation. So I think it's on international level, it is more institutionalized. In the Palestinian level, it's less institutionalized. Why? For many reasons, maybe I don't have time to elaborate. One of them that PLO, for example, exists as a Palestinian framework. It is, any new framework will be look like competing PLO, which is a very difficult thing to start with. But, and also we have a problem of that Palestinians have different legal status inside the land occupied in 1948, in 1967, in Jordan, abroad. So each community, each Palestinian community has its own legal and status, different status. So I think we need to stand up in a kind of confederation, whereas not really reaching the merging all the bodies together, but at least we have a kind of annual meeting that discuss such things, while we have international organizations that deal with misconduct in Palestine, misconduct in South Africa, and everywhere that deal with such things. So my major thing regarding the institutionalization is that we should start to think beyond the network idea. The second thing regarding Palestine, boycott is very important, but I think the other most important thing is that Palestinians are under boycott. As much as it's important to boycott Israel, misgiving my image. We also need a kind of helping Palestinians to be exposed for the world. We need Palestinian universities to be visited, students to go there. We need to help them to build their own institutions. And so I think while we are fighting racism, we need to build a counter body of justice or something like that. And that's maybe, quickly, this is what I have now. Thank you.
Thank you let me just make a few points, and I'll try to be as quick as Ahmad was, even though I don't have a baby in my arms. I just told Rabab that I will next month.
Congratulations.
Yes, I'm going to be a grandfather. So let me make a few quick points. Partly reflective on the day, and partly just my own things that I want to add in. So you'll forgive me for both. Firstly, I think that some people might have noticed, and I think one or two people did make the comment, that throughout the day we didn't have much discussion about BDS, or the BDS campaign, and in particular we didn't have much discussion about the academic boycott. I think that the Teaching Palestine initiative is something that is unique, that is trying to do things in a slightly different way than has been done, that is trying to carve out a new space or new niche for itself. This doesn't mean, of course, that there is in any way an attempt to marginalize BDS or to not be part of the academic boycott, etc. I think that our understanding was that almost everyone that was here in the room from the morning supported BDS, supported an academic boycott, and those discussions are going on elsewhere, and we wanted to focus on a particular different strategy around this. So, because clearly you can't support an initiative like Teaching Palestine and not support the academic boycott. So we need to at some point have a discussion about how the two, not how the two work together, but how as part of Teaching Palestine to strengthen the academic boycott as well. So I thought that I should just make that comment because it did come up, not necessarily in the formal session, but outside of that. Let me then make one more point about BDS before I move on to my next point. I'm South African, as you know. The BDS call and the BDS architects claim that the BDS call and the BDS campaign is fashioned around the South African, well, we didn't call it BDS, but the South African sanctions campaign, which is what we call it, in the 70s and 80s, I mean even the 60s, but 70s and 80s in particular. So one point I want to make around this is that the sanctions call in South Africa was made in the 1960s, actually in late 50s, but let's say in the 1960s. Okay, we had our first democratic election in 1994. Negotiations with the ANC by the South African government began in 1987. So you're talking about at least 25 years before anything substantial started happening. Okay, if we look at the BDS campaign, the successes, not in the same kind of way, not at a political level, but the successes are quite different. And in the first 5 years of the BDS campaign, I think that there were more successes than we were able to achieve in the first 20 years. We only started getting companies divesting, etc., in the 1980s, in reality. So I think that clearly we have different communications technologies, etc., that assist in these processes. But the point I'm making is that the campaign has moved much faster than in the South African case. We need perhaps at some point to reevaluate what that means for the next phase. How to capitalize on, I hate the word, but nevertheless, how to capitalize on or exploit those successes to take it to a higher level. I want to make another point in my closing around this, but let me move on for now. In the last panel in particular, there was a very important theme that came out and was repeated by the different speakers. And that theme was about coalition building, as they said, or alliances with others engaged in struggle. And I just want to emphasize this, the importance of this. Not only for Palestinians, whether they're in Palestine or outside of Palestine, like people that were in the panel earlier on, but also for non-Palestinians who are part of the solidarity movement. And you know, I mean, in South Africa, for example, the Palestine solidarity movement will really will make no headway if it wasn't for the fact that it was aligned in different ways with different, you know, and part of the reason why the Palestine solidarity movement in South Africa is fragmented. This is my attempt to put a positive spin on a negative thing. Part of the reason why it's fragmented is because different parts of the solidarity movement have different political allegiances. So part of the solidarity movement is pro-ANC, part of it is more left and you know, pro organizations that are further to the left of the ANC. The point, however, is that the Palestine solidarity movement in South Africa exists within the cocoon of existing struggles within that country. Without that, it's exposed, and it would be weak. I wouldn't say it wouldn't exist, but it would be weak. So alliances are important at a strategic level, but we should also remember that these alliances need to be, in our minds at least, need to be regarded as important on a principle level. That we support the Palestinian struggle because it's a struggle for justice, not because it's Palestinians. Sorry. And I'm sure that the Palestinians on the panel will agree with me, right? The Palestinian struggle is about justice. It's not about a particular group of people. And if that is our position, how we position ourselves, then certainly any struggle for justice needs to receive our attention. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we all have unlimited amounts of energy and we can all be involved in every single thing. That's not the case. But we should at least be open to being in alliance with others who are similarly struggling, whether it's organizations of black people in the US, or Native Americans, or organizations of the poor, or trade unions, or whatever the case might be. All people who are suffering are our allies, or potentially our allies. Sometimes those things are difficult, but they are. We must believe in the indivisibility of justice, and sometimes that can become uncomfortable. But justice is indivisible. We cannot say that we support one just cause, but the other one is not that important. It's also then important for us how we choose our allies. If we're going to choose our allies on the basis of principle and not just strategy. And I want to say something now that you can take it for whatever you like. But in the South African case, for example, I'm one of the people who is particularly critical about parts of the solidarity movement that have become apologists for the Palestinian Authority. Because I think that the Palestinian Authority is an enemy to the Palestinian people. The events of the past few weeks in the West Bank of PA actions against Fatah members, not even other groups, emphasizes that point, that the Palestinian Authority, I mean, in the South African case in the 1980s, and someone made that point earlier on, in the 1980s, the PA in South Africa would be regarded as the so-called government of Baputa Bantustan, that we regarded as illegitimate, and that was an enemy of the people, that was co-opted, that was a puppet regime that served only the interests of the apartheid state. And when I say the PA, clearly it's obviously I'm talking about the PA based in Ramallah, but I actually mean the entire PA structure, whether it's Fatah, Hamas, or whatever it is. That entire structure that comes out of Oslo is an enemy of the Palestinian people. And so for solidarity groups to become apologists, and I meet with the PA ambassador in South Africa, and I don't have a problem with that. And he makes suggestions to me for my work, which is more research-based than activist. And I make suggestions to him, which he never listens to, of course, but that's his prerogative. But that is quite different. Meeting another Palestinian that you don't agree with is quite different from becoming apologists for actions of the PA. So when Mahmoud Abbas comes to South Africa and says, no, we don't support BDS, okay? For organizations whose main task is BDS, to then issue a statement to say, actually, no, the PA does support BDS. That kind of apologetics, I think, is a problem. Let me move on. I'm speaking for too long, I think, just from listening to everything that was said today, that clearly we must have a discussion about how we might be able to create for ourselves as activists and for activism safe spaces. Whether those safe spaces are in Palestine, listening to the stories from Birzeit and An-Najah, whether they're in Palestine, whether they're in a very difficult situation like the United States, or anywhere else, or other countries in the Middle East. Clearly, I think safe spaces are quite necessary there. I think this notion that we must create safe spaces where we can be protected, and I say we somewhat flippantly because I'm in a situation where I really don't need to be protected. I mean, South Africans, we can say all kinds of nonsense against all kinds of people, including our own government, and we can be quite fine. And we do, by the way. But having said that, perhaps, at a global level, that we should look also at places like South Africa that might be regarded as safe spaces for various kinds of things, whether it's particular kinds of activities that you want to have, that you can't have elsewhere. Look, our ruling party 2 years ago hosted a senior delegation from Hamas and was willing to deal with the consequences, and did deal with the consequences, except that they got particularly shocked, which they shouldn't have been, when they got tremendous negative reaction from the Arab embassies. But my point is that there are places in the world which can be safe for us to have discussions that we want to have, but even at a national level, whether it's in the US or elsewhere. So let me just park that, and I'm not sure that I have any more detail in my head about it. It's just a thought that came to me as I was listening to what we were talking about today. Yes. My final point, that as we embarking on new campaigns, and I think that Teaching Palestine is a new campaign that we trying to find our way through, that we working through, etc. As we embarking on new campaigns, we must be willing to carefully and regularly evaluate and reevaluate our strategies and tactics all the time. We have too few resources and we have too much to do to afford to continually make mistakes. So I think that critical reevaluation is necessary all the time. And on that, and let me end on this note, that I think we must also be very careful. Something that has become something of a tendency in some parts of the Palestine solidarity movement, I think, unfortunately. We must be careful about claiming victories where they don't exist. Amilcar Cabral comes to mind: tell no lies, claim no easy victories. Because we can easily begin to fool not those that we're trying to propagandize to, but start to fool ourselves about what we're actually achieving. And at the end of the day, might realize that we actually haven't achieved much, but we convinced ourselves that we did, and that will leave us and our struggle in a worse position than we started. Thank you.
Great. I would like to address the topic of this plenary, which is critical questions and future actions for Palestine studies within the context of this project, Teaching Palestine. In my presentation, actually, I tried to tailor it. I had a topic, and then I try to tailor it with pedagogy, and maybe I would like to compensate some of the stuff I should have addressed maybe about Palestinian education under occupation and what a Teaching Palestine project can help in that. I would like to say, first of all, we do have vibrant universities. We are working very hard in our universities. Now I'm not in administration. Azem talked with 3 hats. He spoke as an administrator and with stories, and he spoke with as actually part of the PASS program and then a part of the research sector. I was director of public relations for An-Najah National University for 2 years, and I helped set up their international relations. And I would now say why this is important. You know, maybe I spoke as an activist, as a passionate, but now let me put this in context, because actually it would be relevant about what he said about institutionalizing this issue of teaching Palestine. And, okay. While I view it this way, we have 18, if I talk about higher education, we have 18 community colleges, we have 16 university colleges up to BA, and we have 14 universities up to MA, and we have one open university. This is West Bank and Gaza. Now our university is a big university. We have 30,000 students, almost 30,000, 27,000 students, and we're growing. And I'm really proud, actually. I mean, despite I was talking about the pedagogy, about the context of how much of the, you know, the hard questions of teaching under occupation and within the layers of the authority. But really, I have to be at least respectful to the institution I work in, because not like because I'm on film, because because we put so much effort. We built this university, the new campus at least, in 2006, in 2002, we started when we were under the siege. The tanks will go, we will build. And this is, the tanks will come, we will stop. The tanks will go, we will build. And if you come to and visit our university, just an example, and you go to Birzeit, you will see, you will be shocked that we did this under occupation. And as my niece would say, imagine us without the occupation. And really, so we have also, in terms of teaching Palestine, if we're talking about, he said he doesn't like networks, I said, no, it should be a mixer. We cannot just like institutionalize something like a project. Let's maybe could think this as a project that could network, and then maybe we could think of what institutionalizing teaching Palestine could mean. Could be an organization, an NGO. We have to really brainstorm this. But in terms of like helping Palestine studies in and out, I always say, what should we do to help first the Palestinian cause and bring attention about Palestine? And I always put them in points. First, we have to spread the awareness about Israeli violations of the Palestinian right to education. And maybe very fast, I showed you, remember, that list of, comprehensive list of what the Israelis are doing to destroy our institutions. And how can we teach? We don't have institutions of teaching other than, like the broader classroom, like informal. I said the formal and the informal, talking about Al-Far'a, prison, but we have to have the institutions. And we have to protect the institutions. And if there's some negative stuff about the institutions, we fight it inward and outward. We've been speaking about to change the bureaucracy, we fight in and out. And I said, just to repeat it, closure of the school and university, it was, the destruction and damaging of infrastructure, because Israel is always doing that. So, and I will say this, and then I will say what we should do about it. The arrest and detention of students and professors, I thought about it. Sometimes I'm teaching and I see a student missing for 2 weeks, and then he comes out, what the hell are you? He is either in Israeli jail, or to be honest with you, in the PA jail. And I said with I'm not scared. I said, man, and then sometimes I talk with security, I said, man, leave these people alone, let them go to school. Sometimes I intervene with the security if this guy just like is arrested. physical restriction on movement, Ahmad talked about it. It took me 2 months to get the visa. 2 months. I'm not allowed to go to Jerusalem. And then he talked about the imprisonment of us, because before, as we said, we had students from all over Palestine. Now it's becoming more localized. And I really want to reiterate this point because it's very important. And we have to expose Israeli violations of Palestinian rights to education. This is through the teaching Palestine. How can you teach Palestine without exposing Israeli violations of Palestinian right to education? We have to talk about what they're doing to us in terms of restricting our movements. I mean, traveling outside and going, within Palestine. Within the Palestine. We are only now becoming too localized. All my students 90% are coming from the Nablus area. Look at what it does to the social fabric and the intercultural fabric. And the same thing in Ramallah. The same thing in Hebron. So the Hebronites are teaching each other. What? It's maybe a bit funny, maybe it's not so. And then we have obstacles and prevention of recruitment of educational tools and apparatuses. We cannot, if you're in chemistry, you cannot get stuff. If you're in, they really store us to. And then finally, the curfews, the incursions, they come almost every night. Students, in terms of killings, we lost 60, less intifada, 70 students got killed. I have students got killed. I have students, martyrs. I have students who, it's really, actually, as I was planning to talk about it, I told you, but I had an avalanche of things I wanted to be eclectic to get, but I couldn't cover everything, because it's only 15 minutes. I swear, I had a student who was a freshman, his name Yahya Bilal. I think now he's serving, they're talking about where's the Palestinian Mandela. We have young people, Palestinian Mandelas. He sent me a letter. He was in my freshman year. Freshman class. He took geography of Palestine. He liked me, and then he disappeared. And they asked about him. He got a 17-year sentence. He joined the resistance. It was freshman year. He's an African Palestinian. He's an Afro-Palestinian. Okay? And he said, I love you, teacher. You affected me. Can you imagine getting a letter from jail? I have students send me letters from jail. I think I showed it that in that. And then he said, oh, Alhamdulillah, he thanks God, I got an extra 10 years because somebody else confessed on him that he did something else. They gave him extra, so now he's going to be in for 27. He was already spending like 12, and he got extra, he's going to be in 27. He was in jail 2003. So how much now he spent? 15. How much he has left? No. 15 لا 27 من 15 still have 12 years to go. Anyway, so what can we do? Because the Israeli effects on violations, its economic effects, because students are, we pay students, like I bought from my pocket, I pay my students so they can come and teach them. Like we do philanthropy, we collect money. I started something when I was in I was director of public relations in 2005, 2007. I started something called the Student Support Fund for needy students. Sometimes we put from our pockets to teach our students. And then social effects, the psychological effects, we talked about the psychological effect, a lot of trauma for students. Can you imagine, sometimes I call the names of my students at the beginning, they give me the list. And I read, once I read this woman, I don't know, I forgot her first name, Yasmin Deep Sarawi. And her father is a martyr, he was my friend. And I say, are you the daughter of Deep Sarawi? He was killed. So she's a son of a martyr. And I said, oh, I know your dad. Sometimes I read names of people who lost their fathers and brothers. I said, are you the sister? What does this martyr belong? He's my brother, he's my sister. It's amazing. Anyway, so what can we do? I really wanted to interject this because I thought it was missing. First, spreading awareness. Okay, spreading awareness about Israeli violations, lobbying to pressure Israel to stop these violations, and then BDS focusing on academic and cultural boycott of Israeli institutions, academic institutions, because they are complicit in this. And then this what comes to what can we do is the material support. I think also Ahmad mentioned it in the morning. Material support for Palestinian institutions so we will not collapse. So this can come in forms of. Another form which is very important is to increase this exchange. My friend, he was one of the visiting scholars who came to An-Najah, and to increase more people trying to break the siege by coming to us, and this will work. And also, we were so active. This is our highlight. We were so active. We did in our international relations. We did twinning. The twinning, you know, it's not just the twinning. Sometimes the twinning is very ceremonial, but through the twinning, you can do a lot. You can activate it. We did Stavanger in Norway. It's very, very active. We have Lille in France. It's very active. And through that twinning, it gives us the opportunity to do the exchange. And then we can break the siege through the twinning. And then I'm glad and really happy. We worked very hard, Rabab and I, on the, we faced hell, on the memorandum of understanding with An-Najah. And of course, she's getting the blunt of it, that we are a terrorist organization and she's lining with terrorists, but we are toughing it out. So, and to be honest with you, I did, well, in 2005, and I did with Seville. We have a memorandum of understanding with Seville, and I was just so busy, I was trying to find the scholar who did this with us. Anyway, this is my comments about the last thing about teaching, where to go forward. Networking or institutional, at least the project should continue. The project should continue, and maybe keep holding symposia, and then how to materialize and solidify this, we have to discuss. Thank you very much.
I don't have that much to say. Actually, a lot of what's been said. I was thinking about issues of carrying on this project, teaching Palestine as a critical project that I've seen, I think Rabab kind of knit together over the last decade in her own way. And it's nice to see it come to fruition and to see it as a project that people can plug into now. So, you know, thanks so much, Rabab, and Yatik al-Afi for all that you've been doing with Ahmad and with people like Salim and your students. I think there's a lot to say about that work and building that foundation for us. So thanks for helping build this project. Figuring out how to make it sustainable it's not easy. We know organizationally these things are difficult to maintain and sustain. We always want to, especially coming out of meetings like this, where we're inspired, where we meet comrades that we can connect to with intellectually, strategically, politically, socially, and you know, all have this shared idea about Palestine and figuring out how to work towards liberating Palestine. I talked a little bit about carving out space in, you know, where I'm located, which is at AUB in Lebanon, and the difficulties that we're facing in terms of that. But I'm recommitting myself to figuring out because how to make that happen in ways that it might mean hosting the symposiums in the future, finding out partners in Lebanon if it's not AUB because of the things that might make it difficult at AUB to host such events. But I'm committed to doing that. I think these types of meetings, being here face to face, gives us that energy, gives us that drive to kind of go back and do some work. So I hope to be doing that. I think part of what we're doing here as we're meeting and organizing is also thinking about research ideas, you know, within our universities, thinking about areas that are critical, whether it's around pedagogy in Palestine or strategically around Palestine. Earlier today we were talking about over lunch how it might be important to talk about to have somebody do some research about embassies and the U.S. embassies in the region and how they're exploding in terms of size and capacity. Beirut right now is gonna, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, I'm kind of tired, is gonna do a renovation of its embassy that's gonna cost $1 billion for a renovation. So I wonder what that embassy is gonna be doing. You know, the walls are gonna be very expensive, supposedly, and the extra rooms. So these are the types of things that we're up against in some ways, and we don't have to focus on that. I think we do have to focus on our work, and our work is one of solidarity. It's one of politics, principled politics around Palestine. It's one about strategy, and I think Naeem talked about that very well earlier. And I want to just kind of, you know, end on 2 points. One about Lebanon, and one about Palestinians showing the way. Lebanon, it's a small state. There's a great book by David Hurst that is called Beware of Small States, something like Battles of the Middle East. Great history about a small country like Lebanon, a country that is unable to deliver basic services to its own citizens, that can cause some big problems for imperial projects. And I think that's happened at different times in different ways. How we interpret that, how do we write that narrative, is we can discuss. But the reality is that Lebanon, I think, is important. It's important if Palestinians are also able to come there and meet there and strategize there. It's why I talked about the student movement in the late 60s and 70s at AUB, because it was a critical time, not for the student movement, but for the Palestinian movement at the time. And it happened right there in Beirut, happened there at AUB. So I think it's important to kind of think about these things in strategic ways. I want to work on that with all of my comrades, friends, and that I've met and that I've known for a while. And the last thing I want to say is that anytime when we get tired, I'm tired now, but you know, really tired about how do we continue to do what we're doing around Palestine. The Palestinians do things like the Great March of Return, and you know, what it's, what are you going to say when you have things like that? You know, it's hard for me to even express things like An-Najah or what An-Najah has done, others, and that's what we have to remember. So with that, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I first want to start by thanking everybody who responded to Teaching Palestine, because actually the very project of initiating the project and having Palestinian universities in Palestine respond and host us in March, and again having being able to actually get a panel at the Caribbean Studies Association in Cuba, and being able to collaborate with the Afro-Middle East Center and setting up a conference in South Africa in October, and being here at WOCMES. And for me, it's actually the comparative aspect of it here. You've asked about that. There's so much idea. I've actually, when I was preparing for my notes, I wrote so much about so many different ways to think about what's happening with WOCMES. I mean, one of the things is the whole question of the Middle East. We don't even use, in Ahmad, we don't even use the term Middle East. Middle of the East to whom and for whom, okay? And we are, if people from the region are at the center of our own existence, then we're not in the middle of the East to anyone and so on. So there is kind of like, and Naeem and I have been having these discussions over the years, but I was kind of like, so this is part of what defines WOCMES and how do we think about that. But it's kind of like being able to have these spaces, to be able to think about the centering Palestine, placing Palestine at the center of analysis as a space that is both colonized and as a space of resistance and a space of possibilities of social transformation. I think it's actually a very exciting project. And I think the excitement of it, and I really want to also underline the intellectual aspect of it, that are not, and this is actually following up on what you are saying, Naim, about BDS and so on. It is not, it has advocacy components, but it is not an activist per se. It's an intellectual project. And I don't want to apologize for that, and I don't want to shy away from actually being for several reasons. One is that we are in the academy. We are in the academy, we are doing the work, we need to be engaging where we are at. Otherwise, we shouldn't be in the academy. We could actually get the PhDs and go work in non-governmental organizations or in the movement. It's fine, it's all right. But if we are in the academy, we better hold our profession accountable, and we better hold ourselves accountable, and we better model for our students and our colleagues what it means to actually act our conscience. What does it mean? What does it really mean to actually be able to fight the battles? So in a sense, while, for instance, teaching Palestine, when we go on the delegation, all the delegations we go, we do not go through Tel Aviv airport. We do not. BDS has not banned traveling through Tel Aviv. But we are going to go through the way Palestinians go through, okay? And we are going to be able to enter that way with all the problems of going through the Palestinian Authority and also and everything else. It is a different way of doing it. And if people want to go through Tel Aviv, all the power to them, they can go on their own, but they're not going on the delegation I'm organizing. This is one of the things that's enormous. The other question is that we do meet with Israeli scholars, but we do not meet in Israeli institutions. We do not meet in Israeli institutions that are supported by the state and that theorize day in and day out settler colonialism and the oppression of a people, of peoples, not just one people. Okay? We're not going to participate in that. We cannot allow oppression to be business as usual and reinforce the status quo. So this is part of the things that we do, but it's part of the intellectual analysis of it. The third reason why I'm actually not I'm talking about it as an intellectual project, as a research intellectual project, and I will talk about the research agenda in a minute. I think it's really every single time people who organize movements, every single time they organize even a candlelight vigil, if they do not think about what the context is about, who's going to participate, at what corner of the street you're going to hold it, who are the people who are going to be passing by to whom you're sending the message, what are you going to do afterwards, how you're going to wrap up. If you don't think about all of these things, and there is theories of revolution and resistance and transformation, if you don't think about all of these things, you end up doing one action after another, which is wonderful for people feeling really a great sense of, there is power in movement too. That's also a theory of social movement, that when people come together, there is less of a feeling of disempowerment. So that's also part of it. But also it's the very praxis of thought and advocacy and action coming together. Every single day people are mobilizing it. So the fact that it happens in the academy, and the fact that the academy sets up certain rules for how we should relate to each other, and how should we compete against each other, and how we should stab each other in the back in order for us to approach, rather than actually being able to support each other, support open spaces for more people to be able to do the work, mentor younger people, be able to withstand criticism and engage in kind of critical thought and so on. If we are not going to do this, I don't think we can talk about even organizing a boycott campaign in solidarity with Palestinians when we're actually not even in solidarity with each other, and what we are not supporting each other. And earlier, one of our colleagues spoke about the unionization of her, what she has been going through, and the ways in which the bureaucracy of every institution is used in order to undermine and hinder any kind of organizing that's going on. So I think it's really, all of these things are very much connected with each other. I wanted to speak, if I have time, I will maybe later on in the second round, but here I wanted to talk about some of the things that my colleagues have raised. One is I do agree, and I agree with what Ahmad was talking about and what Saed has talked about, is that teaching Palestine is actually about lifting the siege, about what we say in Arabic, فك العزلة, of the Palestinian people who are producing knowledge day in and day out and not acknowledged for the kind of knowledge they produce. Every single time, people are citing, always, it is with all my respect to my Israeli colleagues, the new historians and so on, but the knowledge of the Palestinians does not become validated until Israeli scholars from the Israeli Academy, or like last night, Israel Gershoni actually testifies that Rashid Khalid is a good teacher. I mean, it's in this today, okay, and people talk about moving forward and so on. So that's actually quite problematic about, so there is kind of knowledge, people do not know what's going on. So I think it's really important to know. Secondly, and for why we need to know what we know, because we don't really need to know everything, okay? So certain things we need to know, but what is it, what we're doing with this knowledge? So part of it is lifting the siege. Part of it is actually providing, when we talk about sumud, steadfastness and so on, what is it that we are providing for people to be steadfast about? I mean, that's one of the things. The other thing is about, actually there is a lot of exciting things that are going on that we haven't even touched upon. So there is a lot of misunderstandings about what is it about Palestinian life. And people now, I mean, the political line has shifted, in the sense that people don't even talk about two states, but they talk about one state and so on. But when people talk about one state, what does it really mean? I mean, when people say, I am for one state, what is it that people mean? I would prefer people saying, I'm for self-determination. I am for justice in for Palestine. And actually let the Palestinians figure it out and decide what they want to do and so on. But it's fine, but I'm saying that all of these discussions, the intricate discussions that are happening among Palestinians, people do not really know about. And I'm not talking about like people who have studied and know what's going on. It's another situation. But there is a lot of people in the Solidarity movement, they don't know. They just simply do not know what's going on. I'm very excited about the conference in South Africa because one of, aside from the discussing alternative educations and how do we think about decolonizing education, how do we think about that? I think it's also the whole question of being able to compare the strategies of resistance and liberation, which are not the same. They're very different from each other. What is the comparison between the two? What happened? And I know there is a book called Generations, I think, Palestine, in which Ronnie Kasriels and a whole bunch of people and people from the US movement, Kali Akuno, are talking about what does it mean to boycott, what does it mean, what does this, how do we understand all of these things? I think it actually would be really, really amazing to be able to discuss this, because we've discussed. In Palestine, we had 3 comrades from South Africa, from the Afro-Middle East Center, on the delegation, and we had discussions in Palestine. So actually being able to have these discussions in South Africa would be an amazing, in itself, it's kind of like, you know, it makes your mind start bubbling and exploding. And it's really, the other thing is that there are a lot of issues that are still undiscussed. Part of it is the archives and the oral history. So you're speaking about the students of the 60s and the 70s. We've started, and I remember we met Rayan back in 2007 when we started the Mapping Arab Diasporas at San Francisco State, which we had already begun in Michigan. And you were beginning to start the group called ERA. And there is a lot of archival, there is a lot of oral history experiences that some of us are much older than some of you in the audience, and some of you in the panel, and so on. And we have all these experiences that we really need to pass them on. We need to pass them on. I mean, it's actually a responsibility for us and a responsibility for the people who are younger to make sure that we are able to transmit this kind of stuff in our heads before something happens to us, okay? Because something is going to happen at one point. So I think the oral histories and the archives, and Salim and I, when we were at the Caribbean Studies Association, Enrico was there, hanging, and there were other comrades with us. We spent a lot of time in the archives of the Organization of Solidarity with the People of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, OSPAL, and the Tricontinental Magazine. And we wanted to just do a visit, and then we kept coming back, and we kept coming back, we kept coming back. And the sense, and the reason I'm saying this because there is this archival material, there's historical stuff that people don't know about, because it's not written anywhere. Only the statements are written. But there is another aspect of it, in the sense that understanding, are we talking about solidarity, or are we talking about coalition building? And what does it mean? Are we talking about allies? Because ally implies that there is somebody who is struggling and other people are allies. And it implies a liberal notion of choice, that people choose whether they're going to participate or they're not going to participate. Because the struggle is not theirs. They can enter and exit whatever they feel like it. And I want to, and I mean, there is another notion of coalition building that goes back to the struggles, the movements. Okay, that's the. I'm talking about the ways in which solidarity is understood today, and actually people also kind of like dismiss the word solidarity and dismiss what does it mean. But actually, solidarity goes back to people in solidarity with each other, back to the 18th century workers' movements, for people coming together and organizing with each other and having each other's back. In a sense, in Marx's great saying, a class. Moving from a class in itself to a class for itself. Okay, so this is kind of like when people come collectively and organize jointly. So when the class becomes a class for itself, not in itself, that class becomes very aware of its collective responsibilities and collective fate. And in that sense, then people are not making choices. He does say men, and I say always add women, make their history, but they do not make it as they choose. Okay, it's not a choice per se, because at the end of the day, the terms of the battle, the terms of the oppression are set up already. We, for instance, we choose teaching Palestine, but it's not really very much of a choice. It's kind of like we articulated the project, but we are not choosing the defensive campaigns we're engaged. I'm not choosing the defensive. They're imposed. All the terms are imposed. What we can do is we can defend. But we can also say within the limited options we have, this is what we want to work on. And in this sense, being able to discuss the solidarities that people have engaged with each other, and also look at the topics that we can also advance and think about, and really be able to sit around and think deeply. So in South Africa, I mean, we will do the general topics, but there are specific things to be able to discuss. In Lebanon, there is the whole question about, the whole question of the Palestinian refugees and being even, their access to higher education or education, the UNRWA education, what's happening in the UNRWA school, what kind of curriculum they have, comparison with the curriculums that happen in our schools in Palestine, comparison with the Palestinian curriculum, Palestinians under the PA, Palestine in the West Bank, Palestinians under the which is still the Palestinian Authority, but it's led by another party, Hamas, in Gaza. Palestinians inside Israeli schools, which somebody suggested, which would be really incredible. Palestinians everywhere else. What is it that people are learning when they are learning and co-learning Palestine and teaching Palestine? Palestinians who are the young people who talk about students for justice in Palestine and the kind of the struggles that are going on. How is it? The last thing that I want to say is that I think it's really, really important for us to engage in institutional building. I do agree with networks. I don't think that it is, I think institutional building is sustained networks. I see it that way. I don't see things as binary in that sense, dichotomous. I think it's institutionalizing academic programs, and I think this is part of the reason that we are so much under attack. That if we can pick and choose, and we say, okay, one day we will do this, one day we will do that, I think we will probably go and below under the radar, and they will pick something else. But we have a program that has not only an agreement with An-Najah National, but we're enacting it. We go to Palestine, people come here, we have workshops together, we organize with each other, and so on. And this is basically, it also lifts the siege of us, the support, the solidarity, the engagement of other people. When we do something like this, when we engage in things of this sort, they actually change it, and they allow us to be able to teach more classes. Now we're talking actually with An-Najah to teach courses online. I mean, how do we do that? And then the final thing is that we are going to be having this part of this project, the outcome of it, kind of like making things, and there is going to be curriculum development, kind of joint people we just started. This is just really recent. We want to put at least one anthology, maybe a series of anthologies. We will be able to have symposia and so on. As I mentioned in the first panel, I don't want to go over it. We've had all these discussions and so on. So there are a lot of possibilities, and the topics and the things that are out there that are so exciting are so much more than what we are able to actually do. And I think when we have more people involved and more people engaged and so on, we will be able to actually do this. And this is a very long-range thing. And it is also a survival strategy that allows us to create something that is and I'm not talking about false negatives here. I'm actually talking about really doing something that's very productive, that may not achieve results overnight or so on, but it is something that people can really engage in. And it is on the basis of the indivisibility of justice. This is not on the basis that I'm pro-Palestine or I'm pro-Arab or I'm pro-Israel or pro-justice for all. I mean, and I think if we think about it this way, I think we really can produce a project that actually continues, that builds institutions, that supports students, that little by little, I mean, we don't have anything, but look, we're able to do all of this stuff. And when we say we don't have anything, we don't have anything in terms of material, monitoring things. But we have the talents, we have the creative thinking of all the people who participated here, who continue to participate. Robin Kelly paid his way to Palestine to participate in 2 conferences, thinking there is 80% chance that he may not get in, because he signed BDS. And I mean, this is the kind of the stuff that actually is quite exciting. So this is the things that we really want everybody to be involved in. We want people, and this is the engagement, and this is the kind of, I think this is the kind of ways in which we are able to turn around this defeatist criminalization and bullying, intimidation, into something that actually changes, that does contribute to social justice for the whole world, not just for Palestine.
Well, we have time for interventions, yes.
At Queen's University, where I teach,
A little louder, thank you, please.
Azem from Al-Quds University.
Yeah.
At Quds we have a master program in regional studies, and I teach the political geography. And if you allow me just to say a few things about a course that I gave 1.5 years ago, I had only 6 students who were male students. One of them was from Al-Jihad, who spent 20 years in jail. Another was from Qatar and spent 12 years in jail. Another was from Jeenah, and another one was a PA employee who was on food strike for more than 60 days. Another one was a head of municipal council. So it was a strange combination of.
Is it masters or a master?
And the 6th student was a PA employee. So it was a very interesting combination of students. I could teach them principles of political geography, and I could teach them how to contextualize their experiences about the country. But in fact, by the end of the semester, I learned from them much more than they learned from me. The point I want to make is that perhaps documentations of the experiences of these people who are on the forefront is very important, because it gives so much information, much more than, sometimes more than theory. And the other aspect is that the methods of teaching, the ways that we give opportunity for students to express themselves is also very important.
Thank you, Mohammed. Others? You can't be asleep yet. Rabab woke you up. Come on. Yes, Emily.
Yeah, I wanted to see if I can. It's something that I'm working through. And it's the idea of capital R research, right? The idea that we are people in study, and this is the World Congress of Middle Eastern Studies, the assumption is that the subject of study is the Middle East and its people. However you define that, right? So I guess what Professor Abdulhadi raised is this idea that there are archives that we need to access, there are oral histories that we need to engage with. There's a kind of process of knowledge production and passing along that we need to think through. But one of my concerns, right, is that how do we go about that in a way that's not extractive? Because I think when I think of the word, just the phrase oral history, I think of a long history of imperial knowledge production in disciplines like anthropology, sociology, a whole number of disciplines. So I'm thinking, if we're going to engage in that kind of work, knowing that we have stakes in the arguments we produce, how then do we make it a process of co-research, of hybridized learning that is not solely extractive and maintains this dichotomous relationship between researcher and subject?
Maybe your point goes with Maha's point about new ways of teaching, and really it connects to some of what Brooke was talking about earlier. What if those students who are so amazing start interviewing each other, doing oral histories, creating their own sources of knowledge in the classroom and outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of theory out there about that, and probably, I mean, this is maybe simple, but like if you feel like you're, you know, like Rabab was saying, like if you're being accountable to your own intellectual work, and you're, I would say in the oral history work that I do, if you're accountable to the people who are sharing their experiences, let's say, in this case, activism and organizing with you, then I think there are really good ways to do it and to not feel extractive. And maybe it's just always about keeping yourself accountable, that you're sharing that work, that you're not, you know, the sole beneficiary of it, not being proprietary. And I think it's really hard because we're working in capitalist academies basically a lot of the time, so you have to watch out for that. But I think there's actually a lot of really innovative research methodologies. So Decolonizing Methodology is like a good book about that, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's not.
It was the first book that I
What's
read.
that? What's the name of it?
Linda Smith, Decolonizing Methodology. It's about indigenous research agendas and
indigenous
methods. But I mean, there's a lot out there. But I guess I would just say, like, we can do it. Like, we should just keep going, and we should do it. If people want to share their history, it actually is incumbent upon us to make sure that we do that reporting work.
Just a couple of sort of questions or suggestions, and sort of really more about the trajectory of this teaching in Palestine movement or intellectual debate or new cohort or whatever it may be. From what I've seen interaction with South Africa, obviously the US. I don't know how much interaction you've had with European bodies such as the BRICA. Sorry?
I just wrote the breakup. I wanted to say something about it.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm active with BRICA myself, and I feel like there's really a connection here. And there's also another organisation in France who are assisted with BRICA, and then obviously we have had a lot of Australian. But then, actually, aside from that point, and almost, I'm going to disagree with myself here. I think it's really important when we talk as Palestinians, as our international relations and the international relations that our institutions have with other universities. I think that we have to be really careful not to be US or Eurocentric. But really, if we're going to talk about justice, and if we're going to talk about emancipation and coalition building, then we need to be directing our efforts to the global south. And I recently went to a conference in Birzeit University, which was the most excellent conference I have ever been to in my life. And really, the main reason for that was the majority of students were from the Kashmir, the occupied Kashmir. And I think it's really important that we engage with the other occupied peoples. Also, aside from that, I think there's almost, just like we have elite systems here in Europe with our universities, we have the same structures in Palestine. So obviously universities like Al-Quds, An-Najah, Birzeit, they're more elitist universities. And I feel like it's very important that we engage with universities which, for example, like the Open University or the Polytechnic universities, where students who are actually more engaged in labour and who are more engaged in actually, for example, mothers, a lot of mothers are part of the Open University. So I think it's really important that this is a collective effort in really engaging these. And also, to follow on from that, how do we ensure that what is going on here is Palestinian-led? And I know that there is also this problem. I'm from Bethlehem, so I'm I'm going to talk about Bethlehem University. A lot of Palestinian academics have been denied tenure because the tenure has then been given to international academics who are deemed more qualified. So I think we have to be careful when we do bring internationals in that they don't take our jobs. I think also there's this, there's been a sort of debate and a sort of dichotomy here between, are we talking about teachers or are we talking about the institutions? And I think I felt that we have to be also very careful because the institutions within Palestine are very oppressive, and the institutional structure of the universities are sexist, are neoliberal, and I think we have to be careful that we don't reinforce these things. So I think we need to really think about things on a union level, because the teachers and the student unions in Palestine have every right to strike, and they have every right to be really confronting the university administration and making their real demands to the institutions. And on your point with just on your point with UNRWA, I think we really need to think about how then you engage with sort of third parties within the academic realm or the teaching realm, and how you really want to think about how this sort of building curriculum works in the context where everything is so driven by the UNRWA structures and the occupation.
Thanks, Victoria. That's so much you've given us to think of. Thank you, thank you. There's others back here. I know there's somebody. No, you. And waving, or you're just waving? She's saying hi.
I have a question.
Sure.
Well, I don't know if anyone else is over.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I have two questions.
Say your name?
Paola. Yes. So I went to school in the U.S. and I did international relations and Middle Eastern studies, but this was back in 2009 to 2013. Where? University of South Florida, Tampa. And I asked my teacher about this course. It was the Arab and Israeli conflict. However, we never talked about Israel and Egypt. We all talked about the 1967 war, the Oslo process. So I asked him, I'm like, why don't we call the Palestine and Israeli conflict? And he said, it's not a politically acceptable term because the class involves more than just the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. But I'm like, but we haven't really talked based on anything else but the Palestinian conflict. And then I thought about it, because most of the people that were in my department, Global Affairs, it was white males. We only had one teacher that it was from Tunisia, but he was not teaching the Arab and Israeli conflict. He was teaching something else. So that's when you mentioned the curriculum development. How do we do that? We as students should be asking for change. Should we be questioning things that they're teaching us? And then I was sitting in one of the panels today, and then you have someone teaching you about Islamic law, but they never really studied Islam. And then one lady mentioned that she was like, sometimes the universities are running out of sources, that they just push teachers to be like, oh, you want to teach geography? Well, but you did history, so you can. It's similar. It's okay. Or you can teach Middle Eastern studies. Yeah, but I studied geography about Latin America. It's okay. You can just take a crash course and teach students that you're trying to shape or the next generation. So, and I keep checking like if they have updated the classes, still the same. This was back in 2013 when I graduated. Now it's 2018, 5 years. And what they call the so-called Arab Spring, which I hate calling Arab Spring because it was an Arab winter, it was a revolution. So nothing has changed. My school is still the same, but once again, I don't know what else you can expect from a very very much white. Yes. And my other question, sorry, that took a little too long. You made an interesting point about solidarity and coalition. I was part of the Latin American Student Association, and we have collaborated with the Palestinian Association. But I don't know if back then it was kind of like a trendy thing to do, like you wanted to be a cool kid and have more friends, like more international friends. So how do you really distinguish between, this is like a campus thing, like the more friends you have.
Palestinians become very cool.
Yeah, they just didn't Greek letters and they would have been cooler. But my question is, how do we really form successful coalitions? Like, do we have to find relatable stories? Because someone brought up the, there being like, violation of human rights, and somebody brought the point of South Americans, and when the Spanish colonizers came, but I'm like, yeah, but they left. So do we have to find relatable stories to connect to something that we're not asking? I mean, it's not, there's no way for me to compare what's going on right now it's the 21st century. We're not talking about back then. So how do we form, like, society, how do we do that?
Well, I really wanted to respond to that. All right.
But
I will wait.
there have been a lot of points.
Comments and then we can all.
Sure. Okay, fine. Do we have other? Yes, please.
Hi,
Say your name.
my name is An-Najah. I'm from the Autónoma University in Madrid. And first of all,
An-Najah, your name?
An-Najah.
Danai.
Yes.
Which I like.
So first of all, I think I don't want to speak in the name of my colleagues, but I'm sure 3 or 4 of them will be very interested in this project. So after this, I will let you know. And I think we also have a solidarity group for Palestine, which is not all the teachers that teach Palestine are part of this group, but we have tried to work in the institutional part, and happily this year we will have an Erasmus exchange for students. That this is the first year that it will be open, because before it was only there was exchange only for teachers, and now we're going to get at least funding for people to go. The next step is to get people to come. And what I wanted to address is that I think we need to work a little bit more about the last question you said, like how do we fight the anti-Semitism argument? Because like when I was listening to the people that talked before, like for example in our university we don't have an Israeli association or organization or anything, but somehow every time we do a conference or when we put a movie, the posters mysteriously disappear. And we don't have an open association or anything at the university, and somehow there's always students asking us if we were willing to listen to the other side of the story and bring the Israeli ambassador to the university and stories like this. And
It will not be cool. She said, if you become friends with Palestinians, you're cool. If you're Spanish, it will not be cool.
And I think like sometimes we don't know how to address these things in a more effective way, like, or I don't know, like in a collective way.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, please.
Diego Checa from Granada University.
What's your name? What's your name?
Diego Checa.
Diego. And which university?
I'm lecturing in contemporary history in the University of Granada. And Granada has a long relation with lots of Arab universities. It has had a lot of agreements of exchange, like this one with An-Najah. But it is true that the relations with the Palestinian universities have been degraded in the last years, especially after 2014.
Yes.
With the bombing in Gaza and all this, also the previous months, with the increase of violence in the West Bank and these things, the university became quite scary, and probably because of these Israel issues and so on, and they just cut all the agreements, or at least they didn't allow the students who already had certificate saying, well, you are going to be accepted in this university. You have already the Erasmus exchange, the money to do the funding, to do the exchange. So they just cancel it or try to move students to Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, other places. Why? Because they were scared of the virus. And you need to understand the trends behind this, because this is just a single fact that happens time to time. It happens. But the fact is that there are two big trends in Spain, I think. I can also tell if it's true or not. Or at least in my vision. One is something that Saed said this morning. It's related with the frame, the Oslo Accords frame. Well, the Oslo Accord brought negative peace, and now you have peace, and Palestinians are always complaining, and Palestinians are not accepting this, and now they want something else. And from the Spanish academy, those who are not directly involved in researching or doing relations or teaching or with Palestinians, academics or scholars or universities, they don't know what is going on, and they believe or they think that what the media is presenting is right. We know what are they presenting. And the second, and it's a more deep trend, is Orientalism. Still, Israeli academics, universities are European, mostly. Palestinian universities are Arabs. And this is still there. And yeah, when something happens, then all these trends became active, and yeah, they just cut relations. Still, the university, in some events, protect. Universities in Spain, in some cases, are protecting the academic freedom. We had this year a case. I invited someone from the BNC campaign to Granada to talk on international war crimes and apartheid, and the university received a lot of pressure to cancel, the presidents. Even the ambassador of Israel in Spain called the university, asked to talk with the president of the university and try to make the conference cancel.
The guy from the ANC, you said?
Yeah, it was someone from the
Spanish coordination, BNC.
Yeah.
BNC, I'm sorry. BNC, okay. Yeah, I thought they saw BNC.
So probably when the embassy saw the boycott, the national committee, they just decided, well, we have to, and they moved. They organized through social media campaign against this. They mobilized. Of course, in Spain, in Granada, we don't have either this Zionist organization or Israeli lobby, but we have a Department of Semitic Studies where there is half of the department is Arab studies and the other half is Hebrew studies. So that part of the department became active probably when they received a call by the embassy saying that they should do something. And also there were some speakers in social media from the academy or just students who also activated in social media against this conference. But finally, the university protected the conference, and we didn't receive any threat, direct threat, or this kind of thing. But always we are dealing, when we try to do things related with Palestinian issues, with the idea of anti-Semitism and hate crimes, this kind of thing. It's all what they are using against this. So yeah, we still have these safe havens in Spain. Universities have safe havens for activists even, but under pressure of this lobbies. And well, tomorrow we are presenting also a panel at 9 o'clock on the Palestine and Israeli issues and new approach from the colonial point. So for us, it was very interesting to be here today and listen to your
When is your panel?
It's in 2:09. Tomorrow at 2:09.
The room 209?
Yes.
Okay.
At 9 o'clock.
At 9 o'clock.
And yeah, it was very interesting, and we would like to be in touch with the project because I think we could collaborate.
Thank you. See you.
Okay,
Well, I think that I'm going to raise a couple of critical observations. I think that it gets back to the original question that Ross raised. She raised the question about what about the comparison between colonial realities, a comparative, I believe, a comparative view. And this is a question that comes up over and over again when we speak about comparative and the complexity, using that word complexity very guardedly, the complexity that distinguishes the reality of Palestine versus other colonial realities presents itself to all of us who are trying to address this issue. And I say this from the point of view that that is why it's so critical that we do develop this project from the point of view of expanding the knowledge, understanding, and theoretical framework, or try to promote a theoretical framework regarding Palestine. Now, why is it complex? Because the question is, who speaks for Palestine? Today, who speaks for Palestine? Throughout all of the struggle in South Africa, there was always